Most discussions of the changing media landscape with its budget cutting and downsizing include concerns over the fate of investigative reporting. The kind of reporting that uncovers wrongdoing and holds those in power accountable. The kind of reporting that ultimately defines the classic role of the press as the people's watchdog. This week on Dialogue, does the watchdog still bite? Hello again and welcome to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. I'm John Molesky. Each week, Dialogue explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. From time to time, we've been examining the ways that the world of news and information is changing. This week, we turn our attention to the central watchdog role of a free and independent press as expressed through the practice of investigative journalism. Charles Lewis is one of the world's leaders in that field, having spent most of the last 30 years as an investigative journalist. From his time as a producer for 60 Minutes through the foundings of the Center for Public Integrity and the Fund for Independence in Journalism, he's been ahead of the curve in creating new media models. He continues that work today as a professor and the founding executive editor of the new investigative reporting workshop at the American University School of Communication. Chuck, welcome to Dialogue. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You know, let's start with your snapshot overview of the state of the news business. This is now a common theme, panel discussions everywhere, mostly lamenting what seems to be the inevitable death of print. Give us your snapshot of where you think the industry is at this point.
Well, I mean, this is an industry, obviously the cliche word is going through a transformation. The high water point in history for the number of newspapers in the United States is around 1916. The high water mark for circulation, penetration in terms of population in the United States was around the early 1950s. And as all these new media forms keep evolving from television to cable television to the internet and other distractions, each successive generation of the public, young generations, read less in terms of newspapers. And the advertisers have noticed this, and advertising on the web is quite difficult, or it's different at least than the traditional display advertising. For all these reasons, you've seen bankruptcies by the most venerable newspapers in America, bankruptcy protection at least. Philadelphia Inquirer, Los Angeles Times, Chicago Tribune, and many others. Several papers have closed. The Seattle Post-Intelligencer, the Rocky Mountain News, to name two. And you've lost 1/3 of the newsrooms in America since the early 90s. And when you think about that, that's significant. Today, in a city like Philadelphia, you have less than half the number of reporters on the street that you had 20, 25 years ago. That's true in almost every city. Only a few newspapers in the United States today have correspondents covering news outside the U.S. Only a few newspapers. Wow. That's astonishing. And it's more...
In the age of globalization.
In the age of... Exactly, when you should have more, you have fewer. At one time, CBS News, so-called Tiffany network at one time, Edward R. Murrow's network, once had 24, 25 bureaus around the world. They're now down to fewer than 5. And so this retrenchment in terms of international coverage, local coverage, state legislature coverage, and Washington coverage about all the things that go on in the nation's capital, all of those things have fewer reporters, fewer bureaus, less coverage. And of course, that means less accountability journalism. It's logical.
You know, when you talked about the high point for distribution, it's half a century ago, 50 years ago plus. What happened? When did this tipping point occur where this decline really accelerated? Is it the emergence of the internet?
You know, I think most scholars. I am not a scholar of the media economics. There are people
because the decline's not new, but the alarming rate is now.
The decline is sort of the dirty little secret. I mean, I first discovered this from Robert Picard, who's probably the leading scholar in the world. 20 books, 30 years of study about this question. In the developed world, namely Europe, North America, and places like Japan, there has been a steady, quiet plateau, or more to the point, erosion of readership of newspapers for the last half century. And that is not commonly known to most people. And
we act as if it's a new phenomenon.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the internet has exacerbated this problem. There's no question about it. And essentially, we have a younger generation that wants to get news through other ways. They don't want to read a conventional newspaper with the front page. They want to do digital demand searching. They want to see what's going on in Darfur or climate change in Copenhagen or something. They don't really want to go through the entire A section of the Washington Post or some newspaper. That's not how they access news. And increasingly, you're talking about mobile applications on cell phones and other kinds of other things. And so this is obviously a very serious problem for newspapers. And let's be really blunt. The other problem is that newspaper owners were flat-footed, didn't anticipate the change in technologies, and also made obscene profits and didn't reinvest in the product.
Expectations for profits got higher.
Yeah.
It wasn't good enough to turn a 10% profit. You needed a 30% profit.
That's right. I mean, some of these papers were monopoly papers making 30 to 50% annual profits. But most industry sectors in America, for the most part of the last few decades, would be happy with 5% or 7 or 8% profits. These guys were just almost gouging in terms of getting profits. And the other really interesting thing is that as the ski-on families, the most famous, venerable media families, the Chandlers, the Bancrofts, the Pulitzers, the Binghams, as those generations changed to the children, they all wanted the money. What can I say? That's why those papers were sold. There was not a commitment to community that had been the same as the founders of those papers, the original publishers and owners. So there's a different values and dynamic thing going on with successive generations. So you end up with absentee owners, green eyeshade types who are investors who don't care about the community. They just want to worry about quarterly profit earnings and all that stuff. And so you had a lot of these famous papers we all know of, the Washington Post, just one example, but many of them, New York Times, all of them, they all went public around the 60s or 70s. And the conventional wisdom is that when they went public and when there was public ownership of these things, the quarterly earnings and the stockholder satisfaction thing began to override the commitment to community. So that as recent as 5 years ago, 2/3 or more than 2/3, 70% of reporters felt the owners no longer shared the values for news gathering.
Well, we sacrifice for our causes, but not for our investments. We expect a return on our investments. Right. You mentioned conventional wisdom. Another bit of conventional wisdom around this is that the big loser is the kind of reporting that you're famous for, investigative reporting.
Wow. Yeah, and that would be actually accurate. Some conventional wisdom is not true. This one would be true.
Right on the money. So,
well, you have fewer investigative teams. Yeah. It costs money. It takes time to do investigative reporting. It's also risky if you're investigating a private individual or private company in a place like the United States. You're going to be sued.
Risky, yeah,
you could be sued. And so for all these reasons, it's expensive, it takes time, it costs money, and it's more people. It's labor-intensive, more labor-intensive than some of the other types of journalism. There's a reluctance to even attempt it or to go there. And if you do go there, you'll have one person in a newsroom of 100 or 200 in a corner with lots of piles of papers, and you can barely see the person. That's how it's always been. Now it's worse. Now they'll let that go. So the small to mid-sized papers especially have been just not bothering.
Are there any remaining bastions of old-style investigative reporting with a deep commitment to spend the time and resources and assign the personnel?
Yeah, there are. I mean, in the United States, you still have the so-called elite newspapers, whatever you want to call them, the major national newspapers. In particular, the largest investigative commitment still at this moment is the New York Times. Has more than 13, well, they still have 1,200 editorial employees, which is frankly astonishing, because the Washington Post now has half that number, and they've had 5 buyouts in like the last 6-7 years. So, but the Post also has a big commitment still. They still spend a lot. 600 is still a lot of reporters and editors.
Well, Len Downey Jr. was a guest on this program several months ago, and I asked him if Watergate had occurred today, would he have had the resources to cover it in the same way? He said actually more, that the staff assigned to that type of reporting is actually larger today than it was in the era of Watergate.
Yeah, I mean, I like Len personally. It's actually not true. The first day of Watergate, the Washington Post had 10 reporters that Barry Sussman assigned to him. I interviewed Barry Sussman. They had Barry Sussman as the Watergate editor overseeing full-time 18 months Woodward and Bernstein. He's the one who assigned Woodward and Bernstein. Woodward and Bernstein and Sussman were on this for the better part of 2 years. There's very few newspapers that will assign anybody to any subject for 2 years.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And so I think it's really nice of him to say that. I hope he's right. I'm not sure I would agree with that from my research and interviews. I've interviewed Ben Bradley, Woodward, Bernstein, Sussman, and some others, and that's not what most people think today.
Can you foresee a day where mainstream media, if the term is still relevant, abandons this type of reporting altogether?
Well, that's a concern. You know, most of the best and most important reporting of the 20th century, for example, was done without question in newspapers, and that's still the case today, I think, without question, really around the world too, not just the U.S. The question is, to what extent and how well will these newspapers that have the most editorial employees actually doing original reporting, not web rewrite stuff and, you know, synthesizing and, you know, when will they be able to adapt financially to the new landscape economically, and if they can they retain their editorial staffs? And yes, well, reporting is going to shift also. You're going to have crowdsourcing, you're going to have more public interaction, you're going to have a lot of different things like centers and, you know, nonprofit things that'll feed into this and change the dynamic. So you may have more, as much or more investigative reporting just done differently, one could say. I mean, that's certainly my hope. Yeah. But we can't really say that today. We don't really know.
The path there is not clear, although the early emergence of these alternative models is happening.
Yeah, and I'm up to my neck in that, and I'm very excited about it.
Well, you're ahead of the curve. Yeah. I mean, the Center for Public Integrity is an example of a prototype for what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think that is probably right, although when I quit 60 Minutes and started the center from my house, I was only thinking, honestly, of myself and my frustration and my desire to.
And you didn't have the internet at the time.
And yeah, the internet wasn't around, and so it worked out beautifully. You know, it's now, you know, it's got a five+ million annual operation, 100 journalists in 50 countries, available on a contract basis, a 40-person full-time staff, 25 paid interns. You know, scores and scores of investigative stories every year on all kinds of subjects around the world as well as in the U.S. Climate change lobbying with reports from 6 continents about who's doing what. I mean, they're doing some great stuff. I'm very proud. I've left the center. It's not my shop anymore. I was there 15 years. But now there are about 25 of these centers. The center, there are 4 nationals. Center for Investigative Reporting, Center for Public Integrity, ProPublica, and my operation, the Investigative Reporting Workshop, are the 4 that Associated Press now is using our information for their clients. But you've seen a new ecosystem emerge, and there's now an investigative news network that has been created in 2009, and interestingly, of the 20 organizations that signed the declaration creating this network, which I wrote basically, half of them had just started 2 years earlier. Wow. So this thing is moving very, very fast.
What's the difference between the type of operation you're running out of a university versus what you did with the Center for Public Integrity?
Well, it's a great question. One thing is the mentoring factor of working with young people is greater. I mean, I had 25 interns a year helping out a few months here, a few months there, but if they're in your class and they're getting graded, then it's
a different kind of motivation.
It's a different kind of motivation. And we work more closely together. And, you know, I have a 11-person staff at my workshop that is only about a year old and is still growing and moving very fast and very exciting. Half of my staff just got their master's degree from American University a year ago. So we have like a post-grad fellowship type thing going on where we're continuing that mentorship after they leave. And then we're bringing in distinguished journalists who've won Pulitzers to do contract writing on our site in partnership with commercial outlets. So what you have now is a really interesting symbiosis between the desperate commercial media who need content. They've lost a lot of their newsrooms, but they don't have the people to do the content. And then you've got these new nonprofit organizations doing journalism, and they have the people because they've managed to eke out some funding from various places, and they're willing to take 6 months or a year on a project, but they don't have any eyeballs, they don't have any audience on their website, so they need the visibility. And so by partnering, and that's what's happening now, they'll do a joint partnership with some local paper or a TV station or whatever, and then next thing you know, everyone's happy. One group has content, the other group has
have you been
others.
able to track that? Can you see a growth in visits to your website after you've engaged in some
absolutely.
sort of partnership?
I mean, in our case, we've partnered with MSNBC, USA Today, McClatchy newspapers. We just did it. We were a co-production hub with Frontline, the PBS documentary program, and you can absolutely see spikes up. You know, we've had 7 million unique page visits or whatever. I get them all mixed up, page views, but
right.
you know, you could see, but by partnering with the #1 trafficked website for news in the U.S., you're going to take a site that would ordinarily get 1,000 or 2,000 visitors, maybe if you're lucky in a day. You spike up way up into the large numbers.
And are there people willing to pay the bills?
Well, there are. Basically, there's a study out that came out in 2009 that 180 foundations threw down $128 million to support nonprofit news and journalism initiatives. That does not include...
Is that just in the United States or worldwide?
Just in the U.S. Wow. And that does not include public broadcasting. When you add in public radio and public television, it would be hundreds more of millions. Internationally, the U.S. itself throws down 100 or 200 million annually around the world for for journalism training or for even investigative journalism initiatives in other countries, funded actually, believe it or not, by the U.S. government. So you have some very interesting things going on here, and there are now I was in London, Jordan, and Japan in the last 6 months, and there are nonprofits that are doing enterprise journalism in all those places. Japan has never had a nonprofit ever. Now they're trying to create one. So this is happening all over the world, so it's not just a U.S. phenomenon. And
one very hopeful aspect to this, at least my interpretation of it, is that suits aren't in charge. It's not the corporate guys looking at the fourth quarter profit return reports. Right. It's people like you. It's journalists.
Well, and it's almost it is like a bootstrap thing. It's actually, I mean, I hate to say it, it's a little bit of a class thing, because the people that are starting these centers, overwhelmingly, about 70 or 75%, I haven't done an exact study, although we'll probably do that, is they're working journalists, working reporters, working editors. And what you're really talking about is working reporters and editors are becoming also publishers. It's a little bit like this in a small town when someone buys a newspaper and then there's also the editor, but it's non-profit, not for-profit. And then there's what's happened is a lot of funders, a lot of individuals with wealth around, say, the U.S., they're noticing that there's no information about their community anymore. The newspaper is so thin you can, almost see another person through the paper. And so they need information. How can you have a community if you don't know what's going on? So they're suddenly civic groups, community foundations, local funders are suddenly realizing we have a crisis. Now the question is, how long will that last? That's a different question. But right now they're throwing a lot of money into this, and it's exciting.
What about from the viewpoint of eyeballs or readers? Do you sense that there is a growing demand? I mean, similar to what we said earlier about globalization, you think there'd be a greater demand for international news. Now, with transparency in decline in many cases, in a security state worried about terrorism, it would seem there would be also a growing demand for this type of reporting. Can you track that? Is it something you can? Well,
it's hard to track.
Identify?
I mean, I have my own views about. I mean, some days the famous Neil Postman, amusing ourselves to death. Yeah. So much, as you know, in the media is junk. I mean, it's just mind candy, eye candy. It's just entertainment. And I think that a lot of this serious information is going to be presented and gathered and presented in a different way. Social network areas, like investigative reporting, has never been presented about environmental investigative reporting or human rights investigative reporting. Some people don't care that much about news, but they care about the subjects. Mm-hmm. And so I think what we're seeing is...
Are you describing niche audiences here?
Yeah, niche audiences that also happen to be massive.
Is that good enough to create the accountability that's necessary?
It could be, with the viral nature of the web, and if hundreds of thousands or millions of people get livid about a certain subject and they demand results. We're in this transition. We've got conventional media, conventional ways of disseminating information, but you also are having these new forms with social networks and the viral nature, and you have the crowdsourcing where public informed publics are getting more engaged in information in certain situations. It's a really, right now, it's completely confused. Honestly, no one can really say where this is going or how it's evolving, and we'd like to think it's going to be better. It is very confusing. I mean, for someone who grew up in 3 networks, had 90% audience, in terms of governance, I imagine it's quite complex. But where I worry is that the government is also capable of utilizing these TV and marketing things. I mean, the current administration in the U.S. has more people in the White House doing public relations than the last one, and the last one was more than the last one. And we've had a doubling of public relations specialists in America since the 80s, and we've lost yet 33% of our reporters. So we have less
Nobody
reporters.
To cut through all of the
more PR. So I do worry. I'm trying to put a happy face on things, but it is kind of a scary situation.
Well, let me pile on. Another problem is this. What Stephen Colbert, the truthiness, the age of sort of half-truths or create your own reality. Now it seems that even if you do a terrific job reporting facts and have well-researched documentation, it will be rejected by a certain segment of the voting populace because that's not what they want to believe. Well,
it's really a serious problem. The most obvious case is in 2004, at the end of 2004, more than 60% of the United States still thought that Saddam Hussein had been involved in bringing down the trade towers of 9/11, and there had been rather substantial evidence presented by multiple commissions and bipartisan commissions, and the media itself, even the President of the United States acknowledged that no weapons of mass destruction, and people still believed it. Why? Because you had certain communities that wanted to believe it, and it played into their worldview, and they would just propound it every single day. We have a serious problem about information and truth, and I guess this is in some ways not new. There's always been factionalism and angry publics
how new or different is it, though, in that case? I know you've been doing research on this.
I have.
Is it worse than ever, or is it essentially the same and we just know more now?
Well, it's really hard to, it's almost like a fast-moving target. It's very hard to measure it. Like, for example, we've always had angry factions, factionalism, going back to the 1700s, say, in the case of the United States. But the media forms by which the public gets its information have changed during that period. So right away, and polling, of course, didn't even start until the second half of the 20th century for the most part. So you can't really do a longitudinal view of 200 years of this question if you really, like, say, if you wanted to. And I fortunately, for my own sanity, I did not attempt that. But one thing that did happen is our ability to manipulate information changed. And so public relations, advertising, polling, but also message manipulation.
And we're also becoming more image-based, which leads to a feeling response versus a thought response and a print-based.
Exactly. So between, you add in the visual elements and the other multimedia senses, and then what you've had is the ability to manipulate public attitudes has only increased and gotten more extensive and more elaborate, whereas the journalistic truth-telling ability, basically journalists went from their pencil to their pen to their typewriter to their electric typewriter to their computer, but they're still out there trying to tell you what's happening, but the din is so impenetrable that we can barely notice it, and that is the problem right now. And I don't know how that's going to change exactly. It's really concerning. I don't have a pat answer for that one.
How did you why did you choose this line? I mean, you could have been reporting from the Olympics on the snowboarding event. Why did you choose to be the skunk at the garden party?
It probably would be good material for a shrink, honestly.
We can bring in a couch and replace the chair.
I've tried to be, I think we all are a little more reflective when we get older. I think I was always slightly irritated and curious when what I was told and what was reality diverged. I would say, wait a minute, that's not what they told me. It's not like this. It's like that. And I would, I started out as a sports writer at the Wilmington News Journal newspapers in Delaware, where I'm from, and I noticed in sports it wasn't happening. Then I went to Washington, I went to grad school. I noticed in foreign affairs it wasn't happening with our stated policy and then our covert operations where we were doing the exact opposite. And I whatever it was, the more I got into it, and as they say, one thing led to another, and I've now been doing it for 30 years, 2 networks and these nonprofit centers and books and stuff. And so I kind of, I'm stuck in a rut here. I can't, it is a way I see the world.
But you don't really feel it's a rut. You enjoy what you do.
No, I love it, actually. No, I mean, Ernest Hemingway said that every great writer has a built-in you-know-what detector, and I think that that's right, actually. And I can't always tell when someone is full of malarkey, but sometimes I can, let's say. And so, I think, and there's ways to do that. There are investigative reporting techniques, and so I think somebody's got to do this. It's like a forensic task. We have historians that do this. We have medical examiners after death who do it. And there's a type of person who deals with information called a journalist, investigative journalist, who does it in long form and takes months and does it. And my goal in life is to enlarge the space for that work and to teach a new generation, so it's not hieroglyphics.
Do you also want to see an outcome? I mean, it's not just about putting information out there. You want to see justice served.
Well, I do want to see an outcome, but I also am not going to change what I write to conform to. I mean, I'm not. I'll do it in the old-fashioned way with some degree of detachment. In other words, I feel it's got to be.
But even when you do
properly.
that, there are still people who see it as partisan work. Right?
No, that's what you're very irritating. You're absolutely right. And to be fair, choosing a subject means you do have a point of view, that you notice something in your. I accept that, and I'm not a person who believes in pure objectivity. First of all, it doesn't exist on planet Earth or any other planet that I'm aware of. But there's a way to have a certain degree of detachment and fairness and all that, accuracy, that I think that are important, and I adhere to those values. And that can occur also on the web and the new media forms, and that's what I'm trying to instill, those values, but also have everyone understand and adapt to these new media forms. And it's very tricky stuff. But most importantly, I want a new generation to ask the why and why not questions, and not just be stenographers about those in power.
And a quick final thought, we only have about 30 seconds, but this new generation you're working with, the students you work with, does it give you hope?
It gives me a lot of hope. They're
hungry?
They're doing great investigative reporting, and I can't work with enough of them, actually. They get it, and they're learning how to do it, and a lot of the schools in the country have higher enrollment right now, which is really interesting given what's happening to the newspaper industry. At the same time, journalism enrollment's up, so something's happening here. I don't know what it is.
Good news.
Yeah.
And the website, check quickly. For
it's investigativereportingworkshop.org.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
In addition to thanking our guests, we want you to know that we appreciate your comments and encourage you to share them with us. And you can do so by sending email to dialogue@wilsoncenter.org. We look forward to hearing from you. Until next week, for all of us at the Wilson Center and Dialogue, I'm John Molesky. Thanks for watching.
Dialogue is a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHZ Networks. Dialogue is available via broadcast, cable, satellite, and telco on MHZ Worldview throughout the United States. To see how to watch where you live, visit www.mhznetworks.org.